"Let's go in," said Bowman, but he was very white, and I stopped him by putting my hand gently on his shoulder. And the gesture felt strange, made towards someone I normally so intensely disliked. "No," I said, "stay where you are." There was no putting the moment off, so I walked forward into the dark yellow room where the girl lay. As I pushed the door slowly wider open, I saw a few fingers of blood that lay drying on the mat. In the dark February light, they looked black, as did the red smears on the scaling yellow edge of the door and the jamb. And I was so chilled by what I saw that I found myself behaving like someone in a bad dream, so that I felt glided, propelled rather than walking normally, over to where the girl lay between the two beds. The smell of her entrails was already very noticeable, but after a time I bent and touched the pool of blood nearest her. It was already cold, with scabs forming on it due to the low winter temperature. Underneath it was sticky, oily. The blood lay on the uncarpeted parts of the floor, soaking into the planks. It lay in blots on the bedding, on the furniture, shattered by poverty, on the walls, with thicker lumps and gobs stuck to surfaces here and there. As I pursued my examination, I discovered that the murderer had licked and eaten small pieces of her. He had also ejaculated against the top of her right thigh. Something over by the boarded-up fireplace attracted my attention, and I walked over to find a small curl of blackish shit lying there. Bowman came over and we stood looking down at this hard little turd. Bowman said, "Why do so many of them feel they have to do that?" "It's egoism and overexcitement," I said. "It's part of a very complicated way of getting your rocks off. It's also like someone illiterate signing some document with an X." He stirred the stool with the tip of his Regent Street boot. "What chance do you think you've got catching him?" I said, "I'll get him." "We think so too," said Bowman. "But don't think we're going to do you any out-of-the-way favours." I said, "I'll find my own way of getting any help I need." I said, "And as for favours, you may find that by putting me on this, you won't have done yourself any." I added, "Just fuck off now, Charlie, will you? I want to be on my own." "Watch your tone, Sergeant." I said, "It's my case. Go outside. I want to be alone with her." When he had gone, I got down on my knees beside Dora's body and at once felt close to her, but also separated from her by a distance that I had no means to describe. She was very slender and wore the bloody remains of a new dress. It was pink and white with dark flowers on it. Its skirt just covered her knees. At first, as I looked at her legs lying folded under her, it seemed to me that her body from her thighs down to her feet was swollen, too heavy in relation to the rest of her, that her dark head, slight shoulders were too elegant for them. But then I realized that that was how, propped up against the bed, she had drained. The law of gravity had filled her like that with her blood, like a sausage with meat, and that was how death had left her. It was a long time before I could make myself look closely into her ruined face, with the terrible hacks, gashes, bruising, and broken bone on its bad side. I wouldn't do it until I was alone. And yet, to be alone with her was really worse to begin with, because I was afraid that I might get so far out of touch by looking at her that I might never get back. I was as frightened to look at her as I would be to drown. And yet, I found, far from being afraid when I did look into her face, that I was in tears. The good side of it, except for one smear of blood down her cheek, was intact. The axe had struck her across and then down the face, the bad side. Her eyes were not damaged. They were black, ironic, and three-quarters open. Blind almonds turned in towards the corner of the high ceiling with the sly pointlessness of the dead. Presently, I got out my flashlight and shone it over her, because the place where she had collapsed and died between the beds was so dark, and the old white light shade overhead, thick with dust, was wrongly placed to shed enough light on her. In the glare of the torchlight, her indifferent eyes glittered coldly past me. On these eyes, the dust of our great capital was already beginning to settle. She was still a very beautiful girl for a few more hours yet, as long as you looked at the untouched part of her, for she was only newly dead. Only her brow, drawn in the stiff frown of terror, spoilt her expression, and her lips were unnatural. They were slightly but slackly parted to show her teeth, as though she was finally bored with some argument. Death had already been at work, drawing shades across her cheeks, up to the widow's peak of her black hair. But the saddest thing to me, because it was totally incongruous, was the outflung gesture of her unhurt arm, which seemed to be waving to everyone in the world, telling them not to be afraid but follow her. And it was only when I touched her back and felt the arch of her spine impossibly bent against the side of the bed that I saw how, in her last abominable agony, the poor darling had wanted to try and stand up again, to escape death for just 1 second more, so that she could explain everything that she was so suddenly having to leave. A short way from her, 3 feet from the beds, stood a low table which had not been overturned in the struggle. On it lay a magazine open at a travel agent's advertisement offering cut-price charter flights to Hawaii. I felt it was the last dream of escape that Dora had had before she died, and as I read it I felt her whole presence, a vast sorrow, concentrated on the double-page spread. In the bright photograph, palm trees arched outwards, their fronds racing seaward in the wind, reaching for the brilliant waves. Just under the trees, a young couple stood staring out across miles of empty beach of the Pacific, which receded so far that it finally vanished into the coupon that you had to send off now to qualify for the reduction that was valid till the 1st of July only. It was then, and only then, that I understood what it really meant, the feeling of people's rightful fury and despair. And it came together with my desire to bend over Suarez and whisper, "It's all right, darling, don't worry. Everything will be all right. I'm here now. It'll be all right now." And a feeling was so strong in me that I knelt and kissed her short black hair, which still smelt of the apple-flavoured shampoo she had washed it with just last night. Only now the hair was rank, matted with blood, stiff and cold. I went out to the squad car, parked across the street, and said to the driver, "Get through on the radio and tell them they can come for the bodies now." Bowman was bent over double at the back of the car. "What's the matter with you?" I said. "Ulcer plague."